Okay, right, it's 11. I can start. So on this coming Wednesday, we're going to have the course evaluations in class at the beginning of class. So if possible, I'd like everybody to show up, everybody in TV land there who's listening to the sound of my voice and not seeing my face. So we can get some feedback on the class. You just have, everybody has a laptop anyway, but it's an online evaluation. I'm sure you guys are used to it by now. Okay. Oh, right. So I wanted to do a couple more things from the lecture I had on Wednesday talking about bringing in data from non-Excel files. So here I have in the text editor and Notepad, I have some additional data. And it turns out this data is in a standard format in that there is certain meaning to the numbers. This is actual data that I had from an assignment, a consulting assignment. First 6 characters are like vendor data. The next 6 characters are product data. And this has to do with the packaging size and the unit of measure. So actually, each of the rows here conform to having 6 characters, then 6 characters, then 1 character, then 1 character, then 4 characters, and then an unlimited number of characters. So this is an example where the data does not have a delimiter separating each individual field, but we are able to bring it in by knowing that it has a standard format, the number of characters for each column, and if that in fact is the case, then we can then, we saw last week, we're able to bring that into Excel. I'm just going to place that. So I showed you that you can go about, if this is in a file, that you could go in into Excel and simply say open that file. The hell is it? Oh, I know why. So if I went in and specified that file, it's going to say, okay, you want to bring this in. It's not an XLSX file. It's this text file. And if you recall, I can either say that the fields are delimited by some character or they're fixed with. In this case, I would say it's fixed with. And I would then go in and click on a line to then separate the individual fields here in order to bring it in. And then it brings in the data nicely. Right? So we saw that on Wednesday. Now, a second way that's very similar to do that is that if in fact you had this file, now here I have it in the text editor, and I could go through the path of having go through the file open. But if you wanted to do a copy and paste, so check this out. So here I'm going to do a copy. I'm going to paste this into a worksheet here. Now, of course, when I copy it in, all that stuff comes in as a text field. It doesn't parse out the individual fields, and it just stores all that data in column A. But I really want it broken out by that supplier name and product name, what I just did. So if, in fact, you do if you want to do this via cut and paste as opposed to reading in the file, the steps are remarkably similar. Instead of opening the file, what you can do is you can copy that into contiguous rows on a worksheet. And then on the data menu item, there's a button called Text to Column. And when you click on the text to column, it's going to bring up the same conversion wizard that we just saw when we opened the file. So it's really two ways to get to the same spot of being able to open it. You can either store it in a file and open it, or if you want, you can do a cut and paste and then go to, again, you would go to the data menu item and you would go to text to column, and then the same dialog box is going to appear where you're going to now click here to each of the arrows indicates a new field. So and now that stuff that was all in column A could now be parsed out. Okay, so and you could have done that even if it was a hat delimited file. So if there were characters separating each of the individual fields, you could have also done the same thing, gone to data and gone to text to column. So, okay. You know what? I don't want to do this. So you guys should try this. So go create a new spreadsheet and put the numbers 1 through 10 going down column A. Actually repeat that. So have 1 to 10 going from 1 to 10, and have 1 to 10 going from 11 to 20. And just have the constant, just have 5 going down in column B. That's fine. So you really have the same numbers repeating twice. Now, one of the things that Excel is great for is someone gives you a whole bunch of data, and the data is dirty in the sense that there are errors in the data. Some numbers aren't in the right range, some numbers are wrong, or oftentimes what happens is they give you values and there's duplication. So they give you 10,000 rows worth of in a worksheet, and they tell you, guess what? There are some duplicates in there, and I want you to remove the duplicates. So obviously, if you have a small number of rows, it's easy enough to remove the duplicates. You can do it visually. But if you had 10,000 rows, and I said to you, I'm giving you 10,000 rows of data, and what I want you to do is I want you to eliminate all the duplicates. How would you go about doing that? Well, Excel actually has a built-in function, a real nice function for removing duplicates. So if you click into the data area and you click on data, you're going to see a button called Remove Duplicates. And the Remove Duplicates is going to bring up a dialog box asking you which columns you want it to search on for duplicates. And you could have one column or multiple columns, meaning if you had multiple columns like I have here, it's going to remove any row where the value in column A, in the column A, and the value in column B repeats somewhere else in column A and B on the spreadsheet. Now, obviously, in this particular case, rows 11 through 20 are duplicates. If I were to simply if I don't want, I can unselect them all, and I could, if I only wanted to, in this case, it's not going to make any difference. If I were to say, well, let me just run this. So I'm going to say column A and B, I'm going to click OK, and you're going to notice that, in fact, it removed rows 11 through 20 because they were duplicates. So if you ever are given the task, or you have your own need for having data that has duplicates in it, the remove duplicates, I'm going to undo this. The remove duplicates on the data menu item is a real handy tool. And you could either be based on one column or you could have it based upon multiple columns. So however many columns are on the spreadsheet, it's going to give you the opportunity to say match. If I were to say, find all the duplicates based upon column B, what do you think it's going to do? It's going to remove all but one. So if I did that, it in fact removes all, it starts at the top, and so it kept the 1, 5, but column B had duplicates all through the rest of it, and so it deleted them all. Yeah.
Will it always also affect the column like adjacent to it, or?
What do you mean?
Like,
so it's gonna preserve the whole row.
yeah, but what I'm saying, like, 'cause you clicked on just for column B, correct?
I did.
So, and that removes also parts of column A.
It's gonna remove the whole row.
Okay.
So if there were duplicates, so what I did here is I said, find all the duplicates in column B, and wherever you find a duplicate, remove the row where the duplicate
So
occurred.
it's at them like it's a pair, like so cell A2 and B2 are like a pair, and if one goes, the other one has to go.
Correct.
Okay.
So it's going to remove it. If I were to have out here, and I now say data, remove duplicates. Well, you know what? If I highlighted all of these, so whatever was highlighted, now if I do this, if I didn't highlight it, I don't think it would have removed D. Let's actually try that. I'm interested. So notice it wasn't, that's what I made a misstatement. It's not the whole row. It's whatever was highlighted. So when I went through this, I highlighted A and B. So if I in fact had highlighted A, B, C, and D, and then did the remove duplicates, notice it gives me the option of all of these. I'm going to unselect it and just do it based upon B, and it should now only give me one row. So that's a very nice tool. It happens frequently that you have this duplicate data, and it would be nice to be able to remove it. Remember that if you didn't want to remove it, but you just wanted to know about it, that if you used conditional formatting, under highlighting rules, you can highlight duplicate values. No, I got to actually select what I'm highlighting here. And in fact, they're all duplicates. It didn't remove them, it just told you that those are duplicates. Okay. So let's go on to some other things. Again, from now to the rest of the semester, we're going to learn stuff only in the worksheet. We're not going to do macro things. Of course, anything that I just did there, where I did remove duplicates or I did cell highlighting, if I in fact wanted to include that in a macro, I could have. I simply could have clicked on the recorder, record what those statements were, clipped them out of whatever macro was created, and then incorporated them into my code. And again, I've done that often. Okay, another nice facility you should know about is the following. Suppose I have a cell on a worksheet and I want somebody to enter a number into that cell. But I want to enforce that the number that they enter into that cell is between 1 and 100. And if they don't enter in a 1 and 100, I want Excel to complain about it. In fact, I don't want Excel to allow them to enter in a number, anything besides something between 1 and 100. So with focus on that cells, I could actually have a cell or a range of cells. I'm just doing it for one cell. The data menu item in the data tools there's a facility called data validation. And if you click on data validation, you're going to get a dialog box. And the dialog box is going to allow us to enforce rules, validation rules for values in cells. There are 3 tabs. Let's just, at this point, look at the settings tab. So in the settings, there's a drop-down called any value. Once you click down on that, when you click down on the allow any value, what you're going to see are a bunch of different data types. Whole number, decimal, where a whole number doesn't have a fractional part. A decimal number does. A list is a list of values. A date is a date. A time is a time. And text length is a text field, and what you're limiting is the number of characters that you can type into a text field. In this case, let's suppose in B4, I know that I'm going to want a whole number, and I want that number to be between the range of 1 and 100. So if I click whole number, I now have another series of fill-ins and drop-downs. The one here says between. If you click on the drop-down, there are a bunch of different comparators that you can say, I'm going to want between, but I could have taken equal to or not equal to or something like that. And then on minimum, I'm going to say what the minimum value in that cell should be, which is 1. And on maximum, I'm going to want to say 100. And if I click OK and now go to that box and I try to type in 120 and try to lose focus, whoa, you'll notice that it in fact gives me an error message saying the value entered is not valid, the user is restricted, blah, blah, blah. So I type in a value that in fact contradicted the rule that I just had in there, that it had to be between 1 and 100. And at this point, I can click on retry, and it gives me focus back there. And if I said, okay, fine, I'm going to hit enter again, I'm going to lie to it. In fact, it won't let you out. If you click cancel, it'll remove the value, and now you're back to where you started. And so this actual validation rule enforces that the value that gets put into cell B4 has to be, if there are any value at all, it's going to be in the range of 1 and 100. And I could always go back with that cell highlighted, go back to validation rules, and it brings me back that dialog box. If I wanted to change it to some other value, I could. Okay. Now, what are some of the other things you can do? So this is quite nice. Again, you're setting up a sheet, you're giving it to somebody, you want to make sure they type in the right value. This is a way of enforcing it. Suppose I have another cell where I'm going to want them to type in a color, the words for a color, and I want to make sure that they always type in red, blue, or green. If I go to data validation rule with that cell highlighted, and I take any value, I'm going to take list. So what I want to do now is, when they go to that cell for color, I not only want to restrict what they can type in, but I actually want to give them a drop down. I want to give them a selection of possible values that they can put in. So on the allow, instead of before I clicked on whole number, now I'm clicking on list. And now for the list, in the word source, I can actually separate it by comma. Type in my options. And you'll notice now that after I hit the enter, now that those options are filled in, I in fact get a drop-down list of the possible values, and I can simply click on it to select it. Additionally, suppose the person went into that cell. Oh, wait a minute there, you guys should try that. let's suppose they went into the cell and didn't click on the drop down and decided to type in something themselves and hit enter. It is then again going to take that value, compare it to my list of values, and now it is not valid, and so it will not let me proceed, or it will not let me change that value unless it is actually a valid value. Now, typing in the values might be a bit cumbersome, or it's be difficult to add to. So what you could do is, instead of actually typing in the valid values in the source, what you can do is somewhere on the spreadsheet or some other spreadsheet, I'll put it here, instead of actually typing those values in, I could have put them in a cell, each value in an individual cell. And now I can go on the data validation, and with that cell that had the validation highlighted, I can now go and type in data validation. And now, instead of having these cells here, instead, I can now point to the cells. I can point to the location that has the valid values. And it's going to work the same way. And okay, where before I was testing the range between 1 and 100, where I typed in the 1 and 100, I could have additionally, again in the same idea, I could have typed into different cells what the validation was. And now, instead of hard coding in the values, I could have now pointed to the cell and now the cells K5 and K6 have the 100, the 1 and the 100. And now instead, it's a little better because I'm able to change this. And so now this is going to not allow me to type in that. Okay, cancel. But if I were to change this to 120, so the match would be 120, then in fact, because I've changed that, it allows me to type in a value. A couple of other things. Everybody okay with this? It's pretty simple. Trying to wind down the course gracefully. So, some other things that you can do. So we went through pretty much the stuff here in terms of the validation that you can have. If you click on Error Alert, click on the tab Error Alert on the data validation dialog box. And you're going to see three options there. If you click on the style, you're going to see stop, warning, and information, where stop is the default. Let's select warning instead of stop. You'll notice that you're going to get the warning symbol with yellow as opposed to the red stop. So now I'm changing it from an error to a warning for the number validation. And now let me go back to the validation and change that to 130. Let me fail validation and hit enter. And you'll notice now that instead of stopping you, well, it still brings up a dialog box saying that there's an issue here. But note, it's giving you the option, it's sort of warning you that the value is not good, and that if you still want it, if you click yes, it allows the value that failed validation, but it gave you a warning. So the data validation here, if you were to set it equal to warning, just gives you a warning. And if you were to change that to information and now click OK, and now it's entering, well, you could just leave the 130. When I change the value, it gives you a different message here In this case, it's just warning you about this, and clicking OK just lets you go on. Before, you had to say yes that you're taking it. Okay. What else do I want to say about that? The title and the error message. So if instead of the message, by default, Excel comes up with an error message, but if you want to have something more descriptive, you could put in the more descriptive text here in the error message. You could have a title. And now, when you cause the message, the dialog box to come up, notice it says nice title and more descriptive. Those are the words that I had typed in. Okay, one last thing. So why don't we have the numbers 10 through 50 in some set cells? It doesn't make any difference where. So suppose you have data already in your worksheet, and you want to identify those cells that have failed validation. I haven't put validation in yet. If I were to highlight all those cells and go to data validation, and let's suppose that I want to say these should be whole numbers and that they should be less than 35. So I'm going to select the whole number for allow, I'm going to select less than for data, and for the maximum I'm going to say less than 35. Well, the deal is that since the numbers are in there already, the data validation is not going to do anything because it only does the validation upon entry or change of the data. But if in fact you had that rule associated with these 5 cells, and then you clicked on the drop down on the data next to the word data validation, you didn't take the standard one, you'll notice that there is a circle invalid data. And if you click on circle invalid data, it actually goes through your whole spreadsheet and sees where you actually have validation set up and puts a red circle around those cells where validation has failed. And at that point, you can decide what you want to do. So if you're trying to figure out where, you could have done this with conditional highlighting. This is an alternative. I think this probably predates conditional formatting, and so this is a way that you can see where data is, where you have bad data. Okay. Next batter. So why don't you just create a new worksheet. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is dates. Not the fruit, not what you do with the opposite sex, but the important thing, the data type called dates. So we know that Excel obviously stores and does things with numbers, whether they have fractional part or not, and we know that Excel does things with character strings or characters, and we've now learned that there are functions built in to do things with this data type called characters. It turns out that Excel, because it is so prominent, especially in business, that Excel actually allows us to have functions that deal with dates, calendar dates, and actually even time. Now, if I were to go into a cell and type in 11/30/16, 11/30/16, you'll notice that when I type that in, it's right justified. Normally, Excel reserves right justifying values to numbers, but here it took something that's not really a number. You might think it's some sort of calculation, but I didn't precede the 11 with an equal sign. So it's not going to take 11 divided by 30 and take that result and divide it by 216. And so what Excel does is when I type in a value, and I have it where I have segments, either 2 or 3 segments. Note if I typed in 11/30, Excel actually will also translate that and display it as a date cropping off the year. And if I were to type in 11-30-16, Excel also converted that to a date. So when I type in numbers that are either separated by a slash or a dash, and it has either 2 or 3 components, Excel, when in lots of cases, will try to interpret that as a date and store it away as a date. If I were to type in 11/31/16, sort of looks like a date, right? And I hit enter. Notice that it's left justified. It's not right justified, even though I entered it in the same format I did the 11/30/16. And why did it do that? Why did it treat 11/31/16 differently than 11/30/16? Correct. So November does not have 31 days. 11/31/16 is in fact not a legal date. So when I type in these values, Excel actually applies the rules of dates. So if I were to type in, let's take this to its illogical conclusion. If I type in 2/29/16, it right justifies it. If I type in 2/29/15, it left justifies it. Boy, is that Excel smart. It knows leap years because this year is a leap year. In fact, there was a February 29th, but in 2015 there was no leap year, and so it didn't make it. Anybody want to explain that to me? Hold on, let me give you another one. So we have leap year here, right? So why didn't it treat this as a leap year, right? What's your rule for leap year? Okay, Kyle says every 4 years. How many people agree with that? Every 4 years. Okay, so let me give you an incredibly useless piece of information. And if you don't believe me, you can look it up. It turns out that the rule for leap year is every 4 years, with a couple of exceptions. Ready? It's going to be on the exam. If it's divisible by 100, it's not a leap year. So here I have 2100, which is divisible by 100 evenly, so it's not a leap year. Everybody get it? So if I were to type in not a leap year, right? Because that's divisible by 100. Not a leap year. So what about this guy? Well, the rule is, this is the last thing I'm going to say about leap years, and then you can really roll your eyes. If it's divisible by 4, but not divisible by 100, but divisible by 400, if it's divisible by 400, it is a leap year. I learned that in my class. So in fact, since this is divisible by 400, and that's a leap year also. Come back, and you can thank me back here that you knew that this was a leap year. Okay, but the point is, okay, so leap year is sort of funny. Most people don't know the exact rules. computer scientists actually know because we had to program this crap before, and so mine was cluttered with that sort of junk. So Excel is very smart about determining dates even with leap years. And so when you type in something with 2 or 3 segments, it figures out if it's a legal date, and then it says, it either makes it left justified saying if it's not a legal date, then it has to be a string, it has no alternative, otherwise it is a date. Okay, big deal. You're still not impressed. Okay, fine. So the cool thing about dates is that Excel allows us to do arithmetic with dates. And that seems like an odd concept. What sort of arithmetic could you do with dates? So what I want you to do is put in cell A1, put in your birth date. And put in cell A2, why don't you put in today's date, the 18th? And you can make that, sometimes you guys should know about this, that it formats dates in different ways. So if you have a cell here noted, and I click in, I want to format that, if I go here, there's a short date, which is the way I want it. So the short date typically is the way you format cells, dates, and it's month, day, and year. And now in cell A3, what I want you to do, okay, this will be a good exercise, is, no, I want you to put in cell B1, I want you to put in A2 minus A1. Put in cell B1, A2 minus A1. And you guys get a number around, you don't get my number, you have a number around 7,000, right? Everybody has somewhere in, what does that number represent? So you subtracted today's date from the day you were born. And in fact, what it has done is it has now calculated the number of days you have lived. You might opine on the number of days now that you've seen that you've wasted, but this is the actual number of days you've lived. I obviously, tad older, have about 3 times as much. So in fact, you can do date arithmetic. You can actually subtract 2 dates together to find out the number of days. What other date arithmetic could you do? Well, let's suppose I wanted to know what the date is going to be 90 days from today. Now you're going to say, well, that's easy. It's probably somewhere close to being, if it's 90 days, it's 3 months, it's probably going to be July 18th, 2016, right? But that's not good enough. I want the exact date of what it's going to be in 90 days, and you don't know, I mean, you could try to figure it out. There's 30 days in April, there's 31 days in May, there's 30 days in June. But what you could do is, and let's put in cell B1, I could actually say A1 plus 90. And when I do A1 plus 90, it in fact will add 90 days to today and calculate what date that is. So it can do data arithmetic to project in the future. You obviously could have subtracted to go back in the past. And, okay, so I can do all sorts of things with numbers, adding, subtracting, obviously when it makes sense. Multiplication and division does not make sense. And it has a fair amount of applicability in business. We do lots of things in business with dates, right? How many people here in finance? I've got people here in finance, right? You have financial instruments that mature, right? I go buy a bond, right? And I'm not buying it at initiation, I'm buying it now, and I want to figure out what yield to maturity. I need to know the number of days between now and when the bond matures. I need to figure out the number of days. And so Excel really provides, in addition to built-in functions, you wouldn't have to figure out yield to maturity. I'm sure there's something built in to do it. Okay. Now, since we're here advanced, let me talk about how Excel actually does data arithmetic, and you'll say, oh boy, that was simple. So does Excel actually store things in dates? The answer is it doesn't. Microsoft actually came up with a fairly clever way of representing dates. Now we all know that computers ultimately want to represent things as numbers. I've pounded you over the head with that notion. Everything is a number. So how the hell do we get dates into numbers? How do I map dates into numbers? So why don't you go into a cell, go into cell E1 and type in 1/1/1900. And actually put the same value in F1. And put into cell E2 1/1/1901 and do the same thing in F. And now simply click on column F. I want to format column F not as a number, or not as a date, but I want to format it as a number. So take column F and format that as a number. So before I had dates in there, January 1st, 1900 and January 1st, 1901. That's what I had in F1 and F2. And now I told Excel, don't interpret that as a date. Interpret that same data that was 1/1/1900. Now tell me what you think of that as a number. It has the number 1. And then now look at 1/1/1901, it's 367. And I'll do one more, you don't have to do this. Let me do the following, 1/2/1901, so it's the next day. Everybody get the idea? So what Microsoft has actually done is they have represented days in the year by numbers. And you might say, well, why is January 1st, 1900 number 1? Well, Microsoft decided, contrary to the Bible, that in fact the world started January 1st, 1900. So it assigned it the value 1. I guess it's the New Testament. So it's their computer, it's their program. They decided that the world started, or with respect to dates, things started on January 1st, 1900, and that's assigned the number 1. And every day subsequent is simply an additional number. So as we see, a year later, January 1st, 1901, is 367. 300. Well, there was a leap. Hold on a minute. Now I'm curious. Right, okay, so there are 365 days between them, and that's why it's 366. Okay. They could have started January 1st at 0, and therefore December 31st would have been 365. So what it has done is it simply assigned each day, starting at January 1st, 1900, with a number, and each day subsequent is increased by just by 1. And so in fact, if I were to take today, if I were to go in here and type in 4/18/16, and I get the number 42,478, what that represents is the number of days from January 1st, 1900 till today. That's the total number of days. So now that you've seen that, now you can see why data arithmetic is trivial, because it's really not doing any sort of weird data arithmetic. It's just doing a regular arithmetic. So when you found out how many days you lived, and you thought, boy, that was magical the way it did that. In fact, all it did is internally in the machine, those values, those dates are represented as numbers. And in fact, all it really did was that it subtracted those two numbers to give you the number of days. So that each whole number is a day, and that's how it did it. When you ask it to display it as a date, it has in it a routine that takes a number and turns it into a date. So a couple more points with respect to this. You will every now and again, okay, so note that since a number could represent a date, I could take this now, I had formatted that as a number. If I go back and say I want to show this as a short date, it in fact shows it as a short date. So every now and again you type a value into a cell and you type in it as a date format and it in fact shows up as a number. The reason is that that cell had previously been formatted as a number, and Excel said, oh, he doesn't want to see that as a date, he wants to see that as a number, and that's why it displays it as a number. You can easily remedy that by simply changing the formatting of that cell to the date to the short date, and then it will display it as a date. So a number, any number can either be represented as a date or as its number. It depends upon how you do the formatting. The second thing, which marginally useful, is that you'll notice that when I had this date here, these two dates here, as numbers, and each whole number is another day, you're going to say, well, what's the fractional part there? Why is there two decimals to the right of that? Why is there just the number 1 without any fractional part? Anybody want to hazard a guess? What's the fractional part can be used for? Nope. Time. So not only do I want to know what day it is, I want to know what time it is. Right? So if I were to, now note here, let me take this thing, and note here I was clicking on the format short date. If I were to do, time, well, let me go to another cell here. And suppose I was to type in 1/1/ strike that. What if I suppose I was to type in 1.5? So if I turn that into a date, it's going to say January 1st, 1900. If I were to turn it as a time, so that note there's a time format, you'll notice that it said 12 p.m. Let me take a different value here because it could be confusing. Let me take, instead of 0.5, let me now change that to 1.25. And now I take 1.25 and display that as a time. And notice it says 6 a.m. So it interprets the fractional part of the number as a date. So why did it take the 0.25 and interpret that as 6 a.m.? How many hours in a day? 24. 6 a.m. is what? It's 1/4 of the day, right? It's 24 hours, it's the first quarter. If I were to say here, turn this into a number, if I turn this into a number, stop, turn this into a number, 1.75, and turn this into, tell me what is the time of that, it's going to say 6 p.m., because it's 3/4 of a day. So you can actually do both date and time arithmetic. Date arithmetic has utility. I've not found time arithmetic to be all that useful. So just natively, just by using the regular plus and minus operators, I can do date arithmetic, but there are a bunch of other built-in functions. So there is a today function, and if you type in equal today, open paren, close paren, it will return the system date. So it's the date on my computer. If I were to change the system date on my computer, it's going to return whatever the system date is on the computer. So it's not really returning, most of the time you're not going to screw around with the system date on your machine, but if you did, it's simply returning the system date on the machine. If you do now, open paren, close paren, it not only returns the date, but it also returns the time on my machine. So those are two built-in functions. There's a month function. And if you give the month function a date, so suppose I give it today's date as a parameter, it is going to return to me what month it is in the year. So it lops off the month part of a date. If I were to say, there's a day function, as you could imagine, and if you pass as a parameter a date, any date, it doesn't have to be today, but if you do the day function on a date, it returns the day, and as you would guess, there's a year function. And it returns the year. Those values, the month, day, and year, are returned as integers. Some other ones I found useful. There's a weeknum function, and if you give it a date, it returns what week in the current month, today's. That's weird. Oh, hold on a minute. What if I... Oh, I'm an idiot. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. You did say that, and I ignored you. Thank you. It's the 17th week of the year. I was going to come up with some bullcrap explanation, but typing it in actually was better. So weeknum tells you what week in the year it is. See, it's April. That makes sense. It's the fourth week in the year. Thanks, Dan. There is a weekday function. And that's better. And that's what I had before. And it's the second day of the week, or Monday. There's a function that if you actually had the different parts of the month, okay, this is actually useful. There's a date function that takes as a parameter 3 parameters, a number that represents the year, a number that represents the month, and a number that represents the day. And so if I were to say equal date for year is 2016, month is 4, and day is 18, so it takes those 3 different parameters. It combines them all together to return to me not a number, a date. And what's useful about this is that if you have values in cells, you can reference those values in cells. But I could have done arithmetic here. So if in fact I could have said, what is the date of this year plus 2? So I could take the year and add 2 to it. To any of these, since they're numbers, I can do whatever arithmetic I want. And it's going to return to me that in 2 years, it's April 18th, 2018. If I were to go, this is pretty cool. If I were to go, let me take this out, and I had 18 and I said 18 plus 25, you might say, well, it should barf because there is, if I do 18 plus 25, that's 43, and there is no date April 43rd, 2016, right? Because the third parameter is the day that I'm trying to calculate. But it's actually smart enough to actually say, oh, he said plus, let's go back, so it said May 13th, so what it really did is it started wrapping around and going to the next month, because it's taking the 18th and adding 25 days, so it adds 12 days to get to the end of April, and then it has 13 more days to get me into May. So it actually will do the arithmetic, doing what I meant as, doing something reasonable. And it would have done the same thing with months, in terms of if I went over the December boundary, it would have increased the year. And then there's a weird function that you might not think has any value called EOM month, which takes two parameters, a date and a number of months out. And if I run that, if I say equal EOM month, and I give it a date, let's suppose I give it today's date, and I put in 1, so EOM month today, 1 month out, it tells me that I screwed up. Hold on. No, I'm right. Let me take 0. I used to know how this worked.
I think it's your formatting. When I reference it, you'll get totally different number.
Well, it can't be a short date. Let me just see if it's happening this way. Okay. Fine, I had the wrong, you're right. The date I put in, it didn't recognize that as a date. If I put in 0, okay, let me do this. Okay, now I'm happy. So I had a number in there as the first parameter that it didn't treat as a date. That was weird. But what it does is if you put in there a date, so here I had today's date in as the first parameter, and I have 0 as the second parameter. And what it tells you is, it tells you the last day of the month, however many months out. So I had 0 months out, so it's looking the last day of this month, the current month, April. And it said that the last day of April is the 30th. If I were to put in there a format, if I were to put in there a 1, saying 1 month out from today, it's going to give me the last day of the month in May, which is May 31st. If I were to put in 2 months out, which would be in June, it's going to tell me the last day of the month in June, which should be June 30th. So EOM month takes a date and the number of months out, where 0 is the current month, or the month of the date, and returns to you the date, the last day of that particular month, which actually has use again in business. Okay? So Okay. So for homework, so for homework, I want you to do the following. I want you to first, this spreadsheet you're going to download off of Blackboard. I want you to validate that those values are legitimate, where the number in the amount column has to be greater than 0 and the number in the date column has to be greater than January 1st, 2001. And if it's not, if someone tried to change it, it then would give you an error. That's easy. Then the next thing I want you to do is, this is data on invoices, where each row is an invoice, an outstanding invoice from one of our customers. And in column C was the date that the invoice was sent out. And in column D are their terms, their payment terms. Okay? So what I want you to do is, based upon the date of the invoice and their payment terms, I want you to, in column E, and you can add as many columns as you want, I want you to calculate when that invoice is due to be paid. Right? So in business, typically when we sell something to somebody, we don't ask for payment immediately. We give them time to pay that invoice. They get terms, and the terms can vary. Okay, hopefully this is something you've heard before, certainly in your accounting class. So in my particular world, there are two types of terms. There are net terms, where after the word net there's a space, and then there's a number. The number can be any number of digits. It could be 1 digit, it could be net 7 or net 1 or net 9. It could be 2 digits like net 30 or net 15 or net any number. It could be 3 digits, net 180. And what does net mean? What does net 30 mean? It has to be paid in 30 days. Otherwise, it's late. Net 15 means it has to be paid in 15 days. So that first invoice is due 30 days after its invoice date of April 1st. That second invoice is due 15 days after the invoice. And what I want you to do in column E is to calculate what date that invoice was due. And you can do date arithmetic, right? I can take a date and I can add to it. That's easy. The hard part is, not really the hard part. Let's just take net. How do you know whether to add 30 or 15 days? How do you know it's net? How are you going to figure out the number of days? Well, the value in column D is a string. Do you all know how to extract things from a string? If you say no, you're a pretty ineffective liar, because you do. So you need to look at the value in column D, and the value in column D can either have the word net. So here I'm stipulating their terms are either the word net, which we've just gone over, and then a number afterwards, or it can have the word prox. Now, prox is sort of a weird term. Has anybody heard of the term prox? It's an old way of giving terms. It's not around all that much, but you'll show off to somebody, an employer, if you actually know this. They'd have to be my age. Don't work for that company. So what prox means is that net, when we say net, the counting of the day starts at the day of the invoice. When you say prox, the counting starts not the day of the invoice, but it starts the last day of the month the invoice was cut. So if we have an invoice date of March 15th, 2016, and they had prox 60 terms, it means they have 60 days to pay that, not from March 15th, but from March 31st. So the counting doesn't start on the day of the invoice. The counting starts at the end of the month when the invoice was cut. So if this would have said prox 30, and the number after the word prox could be any number whatsoever, that would mean that the counting would be he has 30 days, or she has 30 days to pay that from April 30th, 2016. Get it? I will stipulate that in column D, you only have to allow for the word prox or the word net. But you have a space after the word net, or you have a space after the word prox, and then you have a number. The number could be any digits. You can add as many columns as you want, and you're going to calculate then what the due date is of that invoice given those terms. You're then going to calculate the number of days out, where the number of days out is today minus the due date. Well, you know what? Check that. It's the number of days. It's today minus the invoice date. So that's pretty easy. You're going to simply take today's date, whatever it is. It's obviously going to change from day to day, and then you're going to find out the number of days out. In this case, you're not looking at the due date. You can look at the invoice date. And then based upon that number, you're going to then categorize the invoice by putting the amount of the invoice in one of three columns: current, over 30, over 60, over 90. And this is a standard way businesses look at things. So if in fact the number of days out was 35, then since that's greater than 30 and under 65, you put the amount of the invoice in over 30. If this were 5 days, then you would put the amount of the invoice in current, because it's under 30 days. And if this were 200 days, since it's over 90 and it's the last category, you'd put it over here. So based upon the number in days out, you're going to fill in the current, over 30, over 60, over 90 with the amount of the invoice, putting it in the applicable bucket. That's pretty easy. The hard part is looking at this, figuring out whether it says prox or net. And again, I'm stipulating that it's either the letters NET or PROX, and there's a space after both of those. Figuring out which one, extracting out the number of days, and I should be able, everybody watch, because it annoys the crap out of me when people do this. You can't assume it's 2 digits. I should be able to put in here 120. And I should be able to put in here 5. Just don't do no right of 2 characters on that. That's wrong. You have to figure out how many characters to lop off. Obviously, you can do a right. You have to figure out how many characters to lop off. And you're going to need that to be a number. Okay? So you might have to use the equal value function, which turns a character string into a number. Okay? That's for homework. Okay. That's it for today.